Welcome to the Filmed Live Musicals podcast, a podcast about stage musicals that have been legally filmed and publicly distributed. The Filmed Live Musicals website contains information on nearly 200 musicals that have been captured live. Check it out at filmedlivemusicals.com. And now, on with the show. Welcome to episode 41 of the Filmed Live Musicals podcast. I'm your host, Luisa Lyons, and my guest today is author, director, actor, and producer Ben Rimalower. His award-winning and highly acclaimed one-man plays, Patti Issues and Bad with Money, have been performed off-Broadway and across the U.S., and live recordings are available via Audible. Ben directed Leslie Kritzer is Patti LuPone at Les Mouches, for which he won a special Time Out New York award. Ben was the assistant director on the 2001 San Francisco Symphony Sweeney Todd Live in Concert, and along with Daniel Nolan is the host of the Broken Records podcast. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you for having me. It's so good to be here, Luisa. Here in my own living room, but here in this virtual space with you.
With your gorgeous shrine, musical theater shrine behind you.
Yes, well, my whole apartment is musical theater, but this living room is 100% Patti LuPone.
Beautiful. We love to see it.
It's a very fitting that the wall that the computer monitor is against is the West End wall. So I'm looking at Divas at the Donmar, Les Miserables, Masterclass, and Sunset Boulevard.
Oh, that's perfect. I love that. So to start us off with, what made you fall in love with musical theater?
Well, I was born in New York City, and I was taken to see some musicals when I was very little on Broadway and elsewhere, and shown videos of musicals and The Wizard of Oz, and, you know, like many children are. And it made an impression on me, but then we moved to California away from my grandparents when I was 5, and my parents were not such musical theater people as my grandparents had been. As is also common, you know, my grandparents were, the greatest generation, you know, quote unquote. And then, you know, musical theater was very much part of pop culture when they were growing up. And my parents were baby boomers who liked rock and roll and, you know, that kind of stuff. And so it wasn't as much a part of then my childhood until it was a little bit. That's not fair to say. I mean, like, they took me to see Cats when the national tour came to LA. And then, like, Phantom played in Los Angeles after Broadway with Michael Crawford. And it actually ran in LA for 4 years. So it was sort of a status symbol in my junior high, like, if you had the Phantom t-shirt. And then, like, we saw Fiddler on the Roof, like, with Topol. But it wasn't until I was really, like, maybe, like, 13 or 14, fittingly around the time I was coming out as gay, that I was, like, obsessed with musical theater. And the thing that really got me was Andrew Lloyd Webber and Evita. And what happened was that we had seen Phantom, and that was like the hot show. And we got our first CD player. Shows how old I am. We were still listening to tapes, but my mother got a car that had a CD player. And so she said we could each pick out a CD. And my sister I think she thought she was getting Phantom because it had the mask on the cover, but it was like the premiere collection of Andrew Lloyd Webber. And it had tracks from all of his musicals up to that point. And it had Don't Cry For Me, Argentina from Evita, sung by Julie Covington from the original concept recording. And I just remember listening to it. And the song was familiar to me from the Evita commercials I'd loved when I was little in New York. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh my God, I need this. And so I went out to buy Evita, and only by mistake did I buy the Broadway cast recording with Patti LuPone instead of the original concept recording with Julie Covington. But I fell so hard for Patti LuPone. And then I got into all things Patti as I was getting into musical theater. And Patti really has been my number one favorite anything consistently, you know, throughout all these decades.
So would you say that cast recordings and albums were like your gateway into, obviously you were able to see some productions, but that was like the main way that you consumed?
Very much so. I mean, and, you know, it's funny because all I could think then was I can't wait to be old enough to move to New York and see everything, you know, and I was really resentful of my family for taking me away. And now I've lived in New York for, 23 years. And I do see everything, but I love things more when I was in high school and I couldn't see them. And it was just the cast recordings, even terrible musicals like The Goodbye Girl. You know, I mean, I remember being like, my grandparents were telling me how bad it was because they lived in New York and they saw everything. And they were, my grandfather was like, I saw Bernadette and Martin Short on the Tonight Show. They both need a haircut. And I was like, sacrilege. How can you speak of the great Bernadette Peters that way? And it was like, what do you mean it's terrible? It's a Marvin Hamlish musical starring Bernadette Peters. No questions asked. I'm going to love every second of it. And I remember being at Tower Records, 9 a.m., skipping class to go to the record store to buy it the day it came out and listening to it nonstop, learning every single song. And then I came to New York that summer for a pre-college program at Columbia. And because I was only 17, but I was in New York for 3 weeks that summer and I saw every show. And I saw The Goodbye Girl twice. And I didn't even have a concept of it being bad or good. It was Bernadette Peters in a brand new Broadway musical. And, it was so exciting to me then, every single show, and I'm so jaded now and I hate most things. And I long for that heart that I had when I was little.
Did you ever watch filmed live performances like on PBS or things like that?
Absolutely. I mean, and no wonder that you transition right there because number one amongst those was the original Broadway production of Into the Woods, and it was so impactful to me because it was around that time exactly when I was like 14, and I was really obsessed with Andrew Lloyd Webber and Patti LuPone, and I was getting into all the Andrew Lloyd Webber shows, which included, of course, Betty Buckley and Elaine Page in the 2 recordings of Cats, and Bernadette Peters and Marty Webb in the 2 recordings of Song and Dance, and all the Evitas. But so then there was this Sondheim, A Celebration at Carnegie Hall, was this concert, and it was released on CD, and there was a televised version on PBS. And I didn't really know Sondheim other than he had written the words to West Side Story and Gypsy, and that people talked about him as the real connoisseur's choice among musical theater. And so I saw this concert, and then there was Patti LuPone singing Being Alive so thrillingly, and Bernadette Peters singing Not a Day Goes By so definitively, and Betty Buckley the same with Children Will Listen from Into the Woods. And then there was a video of Into the Woods that I could then, listen to. And it was confusing to me that it was Bernadette Peters starring in it, not Betty Buckley, because Betty Buckley was the one that blew my mind with Children Will Listen. But that concert was so accessible to me as a teenager. Not just that literally it was accessible. I could rent the video, but it was, I understood those stories and those characters. And so I think that I not only memorized the score from the cast recording, but I memorized the entire script. I mean, I know every single word that Joanna Gleason said as the baker's wife. And it's a detriment, I think, to our generation. Well, I'm much older than you, but starting with my generation and then all the generations younger, any production of Into the Woods has to live up not just to the iconic vocal performances of the songs, but to the iconic acting of the whole thing, because we all remember every single facial expression and laugh that those actors scored. But it was extremely crucial for me. And the same goes with Sunday in the Park with George, with that original production. And then I started, seeking those out. And of course, there was also, with Sondheim, it was really a boon because there was Into the Woods and Sunday in the Park with George and Sweeney Todd. Not exactly the original cast because it was the tour and it was George Hearn, but George Hearn was wonderful. And so, there were other musicals, but that really was like sort of, as they say, like in the chutes and ladders of life, that was really an immediate, I got to go from 0 to 60 in terms of being a Sondheim fan from those 3 shows. And there was other things too. There was a Little Night music video from the City Opera production that randomly my grandparents had taped off of TV. And so that got me into a Little Night music, because it made a difference. I think part of the reason the Andrew Lloyd Webber shows and like Les Mis and Miss Saigon were so impactful was because they were sung through. So the cast recordings represented the whole show, as opposed to when I would get a cast recording of something like Company or, even Funny Girl or whatever. There's no book on the cast recording, so you're a little bit trying to piece together what's the story here. Whereas those sung through shows, you got the whole thing. But then when there was a video, you got to experience the whole show.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because Lloyd Webber also has had many of his or several of his shows filmed and released, like the concert versions of Phantom and I was about to say Les Mis. That is not Lloyd Webber at all. I'm
But
thinking
but
Cat
but many of
McIntosh,
his, you're right though,
but
Cats and
yeah,
Jesus Christ Superstar. I mean, the
there we
funny
go.
thing is,
Yeah,
none of those had been done when I was a kid,
yeah.
so it was not. I mean, there's so much, you know. It was really like a limited supply when I was growing up, which in a way, you know, at the time, I mean, I think it's wonderful that more things are done, and it's a wonderful thing, but it's a resource. But in a way, I was more resourceful when I was younger, and things were scarce because you had to seek out what little there was, and you treasured it. And now it's like,
Mm.
well, I prefer this concert version of Jesus Christ Superstar to that concert version of Jesus Christ Superstar. You know?
Yeah, and there's YouTube has just changed the game. There's just,
Oh
I mean,
yeah.
anything and
Oh, for
everything,
sure.
whether
I
it's
mean, the
legal or not is a different question,
exactly.
but there's so much available.
Totally. And not only that, even the illegal ones now are so watchable. I mean, I would watch videos of Patti and Evita that are, you know, it's even calling it a video is like an insult to like the like technology of what video is, because it's like it's really just like it's like you're looking through this like scratchy, grainy, far
Grainy.
away thing. Now
You're
these
just looking at a
bootlegs.
spotlight with a vague silhouette of a human in
Exactly. And now
it.
every single person has a high def video camera in their pocket, you know?
It's amazing how much the technology has changed and
Yeah.
how it's made it so much more accessible than ever
Yeah.
before,
Which is
and yet
wonderful.
we still have this huge resistance in the industry to filming and making it
I think it's
available.
very foolish and short sighted of the producers. And I think as these people die off and younger, more innovative people take the reins and are in control, we will see much more of that happening. And I think it will be to the better. I think it will help the commercial success of live theater productions, and it will make theater something that is more widely cherished by a larger cross section of young people.
Absolutely. And I want to fast forward to your one man show, Patti Issues,
Yeah,
which was first performed at the Duplex
that's
in
right.
2012. Am I
That's when it
remembering that
opened. I mean, I
correctly?
did it for a long time, and you know, I did it all over. But I even did it in London at the now they call it the Other Palace, but it was the St James Theatre when I did it there in 2016, I think.
So, for folks that haven't seen it or heard it yet, can you give us a quick rundown of what Patti Issues is all about?
Sure. Well, the title is a play on daddy issues because one of the two threads that are the thrust of the show is about my relationship with my father, who is gay and came, like as am I, but who came out of the closet in 1985, which was a very difficult time for me to deal with having a gay father, and certainly for him to deal with being gay. I was only 9 years old, and it's a lot about the sort of drama of our relationship, which ultimately ended. I mean, he's a piece of work. But the other main thread of the show is about my lifelong obsession with Patti LuPone and how I really, she was, you know, kind of my escape and my sense of fantasy, but you know, also my sense of empowerment through her fierceness, particularly in Evita, as I was growing up. And then how when I was an adult in New York City, my first job in theater in New York was being the assistant director of the New York Philharmonic concert of Sweeney Todd in 2000 with Patti and George Hearn. And then I
And
was
Audra?
and Audra McDonald, that's exactly right. Neil Patrick Harris. I mean, a wonderful cast of all these opera stars, Heidi Grant Murphy and Paul Plishka and John Ehlers. And that
Not bad for
production,
a first job with director Lonny Price.
yes, yes. And then I assisted Lonnie on everything he did for 3 years, including the Broadway show A Class Act and a bunch of things. But among the things we did was a remount of essentially that Sweeney production in 2001 in San Francisco at the Symphony, which we filmed for PBS and that Lonnie won an Emmy for. And then we also did that at the Ravinia Festival. And then we went back the following year to the Ravinia Festival and then did Little Night Music. And then Lonnie continued to do a series of Sondheim shows at the Ravinia Festival after I'd moved on. So anyway, I chart how that began in the play Patti Issues. I chart how that began my personal relationship with Patti LuPone, which has been rather close ever since then. We got along very well because, you know, Patti likes cute little 23-year-old gay boys who were obsessed with her, and she's wonderful. But we had some tension too at one point because Patti had given me her blessing to mount this play, this show that was called Leslie Kritzer's Patti LuPone at Les Mouches, where I put together a script for a one-woman show, Patti LuPone at Les Mouches, that Leslie Kritzer played Patti LuPone, and we recreated Patti's nightclub act at Les Mouches that she had done at midnight every Saturday during the run of Evita, which nobody knew about anymore. This was 2006. It had been 26 years. And that was completely forgotten. But the show was a huge success, and we kept getting extended, and we were touring, and we got in a rave in the New York Times. And then we were being recorded by Ghostlight Records, which is the same label that had released Patti's most recent albums at that point, The Lady with the Torch, and et cetera. And that's when Patti basically changed her mind and was very upset and didn't want us to do the show at all anymore. And she felt that, what she said was, "It's my name, Ben. It's my name." She said, this is all in Patti Issues, is about me dealing with her in this conflict. But she said, God, I forgot my own script because I quote Patti in it. Now I can't remember exactly what she said, but it's like, but basically she felt that no matter how we intended it, people would see it as camp, and she didn't want to be portrayed that way. And she was about to open in Gypsy at City Center, and she didn't want people to say, if you want to see the real Patti LuPone, go down to New York, go downtown to Joe's Pub, So that was very painful for me and Leslie because we had created something that was so good and so successful, and that was really so loving and honoring of Patti. And then it ended. But the good news was that then after that was sort of the dust had settled on that, I got together with Patti to produce an album of her original Les Mouches performances, taken from these scratchy tapes that her musical director, David Lewis, had saved. So now everybody knows Patti LuPone at Les Mouches, even though it had been totally obscured at that point. So that was wonderful. And so my show, Patti Issues, charts that whole journey. And someday when Patti's gone, we'll do Les Mouches again.
In the very far off distant future, please.
Yes, God willing. Because she's going strong. Let me tell you, I just saw her last night in Company again, and she's better than ever. And I saw the great cabaret star a few nights ago, Marilyn May, who is 94 and still belting and kicking and just doing it all. And I thought, that's going to be Patti LuPone. She's nowhere near close to slowing down. I mean, Patti's just about to turn 73, which is, considerably younger than Marilyn May. But, a lot of women Patti's age are slowing down, and Patti's nowhere near that, despite, she talks about, this is my last musical, dolls, but it's not even close.
Didn't she say that, like, pre-war paint? That was
she said that pre-everything. She said that she said that literally in 1999. I'm not joking. She said that.
I love the drama. When did you decide to record Patti Issues? When was that recording made?
It was, I think, around 2016. I had opened my second solo play, Bad with Money, and then at that point I was doing them in repertory. And a man named Glenn Rovin, who's unfortunately since passed, but he had approached me about doing it as like an audiobook format for his record label, Rovin Records. And then he had the idea to do it live in front of the audience, since it was such a audience. Both of them, I mean, even those shows have a lot of darkness in them, they both have a lot of comedy too, and the energy with the interaction with the audience was certainly part of the experience. So I'm glad that he had that thought.
Yeah. And when was it released, or how was it first released? I know it's now available on Audible.
I think it was first on Audible. I mean, I think there was I don't think they even pressed any actual CDs. It was like 2017 when it came out, and I think it was all Audible and and iTunes and all that. But I think that was the whole deal.
Always digital.
Yeah, digital.
Now that CD has gone the way of the dodo.
Yeah, exactly.
It's so crazy because I'm old enough to I had tapes when I was little, and I
Yeah.
remember winding them with my pencil and
Somebody else was just talking about that the other day. Yeah.
oh, that's funny. Yeah, it's interesting how it's a good and a bad thing that things have moved to digital, because when the internet goes down, what happens to all of this content that is available online but not in hard copy?
Well, it is important to save things on hard drives, but we don't need all the CDs and the cases taking up whole walls of our homes.
The archivist in me is like, what happens when this doesn't exist anymore? What
Well,
what
we just
what are
have
we
to
going
have
to
hard
dig through?
drives. Got to
Yeah.
have backup, and we have to have redundancy.
We can't even read floppy disks anymore. It's so crazy
I
how
know
quickly it
the
changes.
technology does change. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, it is. So let's jump over to Sweeney Todd. You mentioned
Yes.
that it was your first gig in New York City. That
Yeah.
blows my mind. So how did that job come about?
Well, funny enough, Lonny Price, his parents, Murray and Edie Price, rest in peace, Edie Price, they had gone to high school with my grandparents. And so the two couples had reconnected. Now, Lonnie did not grow up with my father because I don't think that they had stayed in touch after high school, the two couples. But then in the 70s, when my parents were already, grown ups and married, the my grandparents and Murray and Edie Price reconnected, and they became good friends. And my grandparents would always talk about Lonny Price, and we would see him and his sister Jody at certain holiday dinners and things. And I knew that Lonnie was an actor, and like I cared about it when I was a little older. Like he was in The Muppets Take Manhattan, um, and then he was in Dirty Dancing, and he was like on an episode of The Golden Girls, and so I was very aware of Lonnie in that way. And then I knew that he had moved on and was not focusing so much on acting anymore and was directing, which was already from the time I was in high school. I really at that time I'm a writer and performer more than anything, but when I was in high school, all I wanted to do was direct Broadway musicals. And and Lonnie was doing that, and I was very aware of his work because he was doing things that were rather mainstream. And So I had reached out to him. Oh no, I ran into him actually when I was a freshman in college. I My parents had taken me to New York for spring break, and they were flying back to LA with my brother and sister who were younger than me, and I was flying back to Berkeley where I was in college and in Northern California. And so I was by myself waiting for my flight, and my flight was overbooked. And they offered me, what was like a $400 certificate if I would wait 3 hours or 5 hours, whatever it was, and take a later flight. I said, okay, fine, I'll take it. And so I'm waiting, and I go to the newsstand and I buy a New York Times, and I open it to the art section, and there's a great big photo of Patti LuPone, and said after her humiliating firing from Sunset Boulevard, her return to the stage in the United States will be the City Center Encore's production of Pal Joey as Vera Simpson, May 7th through 9th, or whatever the exact dates were, which was like 6 weeks later. And I went right back to the counter with my $400 certificate, and I said, I want a round trip from Oakland, California to New York for May 7th. So I remember I called my parents when I landed, and I was like, oh my God, this was such kismet that I got it. And they were like, what the hell are you doing? You should be in school. You don't have money to go to New York City. I said, the plane ticket's free. They said, where are you going to stay? I was like, goodbye. I'm
I'll figure it
18.
out.
Yeah. But it really was fate. I mean, because I went to Pal Joey, and of course it was absolutely thrilling. I mean, of all the things I've ever seen, Patti LuPone walking out onto a New York stage, her first entrance in that show, after everything that she'd been through with Sunset Boulevard, everything that had been in the press, the reaction. I mean, it was religious,
Electric. Yeah.
and it was such a experience of us as the audience giving her love. She hadn't sung or a note. She hadn't spoken a word yet. I think she had one line. She came out and said something like, "How do they have enough room for the guns in those?" I don't know. She had some kind of a Patty moment, but it was like, and it was just like a wall of just insane standing ovation that wouldn't stop. And so of course I had to be there. And then at intermission in the lobby, there was Lonnie. and who had directed it. And I went running over to him and I was like, "Hi, Lonny." And he was like, "Hi." And I was like, "I don't know if you remember me. I'm Dottie Schmonis's grandson." And he said, "Oh my God, I haven't seen you since you were, he said,
You
"What do
were
you
only
want to?"
so high.
Exactly. And he said, are you in school? I said, "Yeah, I'm at Berkeley. I'm studying theater." And he said, "Oh, do you want to be an actor?" I said, "No, I want to be a director like you." And he said, "Well, you know what? Let me know if you ever want to assist me on anything. I'm in the book," which was, the phone book back in the day when that was a thing. And so I got back to college and I called Lonny and I kept in touch with him. And then he already had an assistant when I was done with school. So I had gotten a job. I worked on the TV show Spin City for a year when I first moved to New York. But then not a whole year. Well, actually, I did an internship at the McCarter Theater in Princeton for 9 months. Then I worked on Spin City for 9 months. And then, so it was like a year and a half. But then Lonny had Sweeney Todd starting and it was perfect. And he had taken me to dinner a couple of times after I moved to the city. And, we talked about what he had coming up and what I was doing and all that. And anyway, it was a great thing. Sweeney Todd was a great thing for me to start out with him on because as a concert version, it was only 2 weeks of rehearsal. So of course, Lonny had been preparing, for a lot of time before that. But if he didn't like working with me, it wasn't like he had to grin and bear it, but we loved, we loved each other and we loved working together. So I wound up staying with him for 3 years and worked on some great projects. But of course, that was incredibly exciting, and then to get to work on the filming of it was special. And it made me appreciate something from my childhood, going back to Into the Woods and Sunday in the Park with George, which was that Sunday in the Park with George, they brought in a television director, Terry Hughes, who you'll see his name on the credits of like the Golden Girls and other things, to film it for television. But with Into the Woods, James Lapine had established himself at a much higher level. And he said, "No, I want to make some films and I've been learning how to work the cameras and I will direct the cameras." And you see the difference. I mean, as brilliant as Sunday in the Park with George is, the filming feels very much like you hired a videographer to preserve the stage show. Whereas the Into the Woods production, clearly James Lapine knows exactly where to focus the camera every single second of that piece. And it's why it's, all things being equal between the two stage pieces, it's such a more effective filming of it. And that's something that, Lonny had already been working as a television director for years, directing soap operas was how he paid the bills as an actor, actually, in the 80s and 90s. And so Lonny was really ready for that challenge with Sweeney Todd. And of course, Lonny's gone on to direct so many filmed musicals in the years since then. But, as well as the Sondheim birthday concert when he turned 80, that iconic show. And, but you can tell, I mean, Lonny really works the cameras. And, and Lonny was, when we got to San Francisco, Lonny was in a truck behind the theater watching, the bank of 7 cameras. Not me. I was 3 champagnes in, sitting in the front row mezz, enjoying the show. But I went with him to the editing a lot in the months that followed. It was fascinating.
I want to rewind a little bit to what you were talking about with Sunday in the Park and Into the Woods. And I think I'm remembering this correctly. The audience it was a special performance of Sunday in the Park. It was filmed after it was closed, and it was a special performance just for the taping.
No, I don't think that's true. I think the show was still running. Mandy and Bernadette were gone already, and they were brought back. But the show was still running. And same with Into the Woods. Bernadette and Joanna and probably some other people were
Chip,
gone and came back. Yeah.
But what I'm remembering is that in Sunday, the
That's true.
audience were directed to
Passion, by the
be
way, excuse me.
yes.
Passion was filmed after it closed with
And that
no
was filmed with
audience. Yeah.
no audience, that's right. But what I'm remembering for Sunday is that the audience were directed to kind of keep their responses down to be
How
muted for the
funny.
cameras, whereas Into the Woods, it was just filmed. And so I think that exchange of energy between the audience and the actors is not captured in the same way in Sunday
Totally.
as
That's
it
so
is with
interesting.
Into
I'd
the
never
Woods.
heard that before, and it makes so much sense. That really,
Yeah.
uh, I mean, people don't so many people have so many bad ideas.
Well, it's so interesting, like this divide between film and television and theater and this fear of combining them. And there are very few people who are really, really good. Like Lonnie is one of the masters of it, is who is able to see with the theatrical eye and then how that will work on film.
Yeah.
It's a very rare gift.
Yeah, I mean, Lonnie went on, in addition to all the shows he directed for television, he even directed things for television that were other people's productions. I mean, of course, Lonnie directed the New York Philharmonic Company, and he filmed that for television. But Lonnie also filmed the television taping of the John Doyle production of Company with Raul Esparza. And Lonnie filmed the television taping of Gypsy with Imelda Staunton,
Mm-hmm.
the ultimate betrayal of Patti LuPone. Although I suppose she betrayed him first because after he directed her in Gypsy at Ravinia, she then did it on Broadway with Arthur Lawrence directing. But I don't know if that was under Patti's control.
The inside gossip.
Yeah.
So going back to this New York Phil / San Francisco Symphony, Sweetie.
Yeah.
What was Lonnie's approach to the show? I've read that he thought of it as like Pacific Overtures meets Sweeney Todd, this idea of like kabuki theater almost implemented on Sweeney.
Yeah, well, that kabuki theater might be a little farther than he went. What he took from kabuki, which Lonnie knew well because Lonnie was the ultimate. I mean, I know so many people that are obsessed with musical theater and have these encyclopedic knowledges, but Lonnie really takes the cake. I mean, Lonnie was such a theater nerd growing up. He invested his bar mitzvah money in the Angela Lansbury production of Gypsy and in Pacific Overtures. And he was an intern in Hal Prince's office when he was 14. And I mean, it's so funny that just a couple years later, they cast him in Merrily Roll Along. I mean, it's got to be inspiration to every intern everywhere, But of course, Lonnie was incredibly talented too. But he was very smart and knowledgeable. And so he remembered all the stuff he learned from Hal's process on Pacific Overtures, which of course was done kabuki. And one of the things he took from it when he approached the Sweeney Todd production was that because Lonnie felt, after having directed a few of these concert versions, most notably he had done Pal Joey with Patti at City Center Encores at that time. He went on to do many more, but at that point he had done Pal Joey at City Center Encores with Patti, and he had done Annie Get Your Gun with Patti at Lincoln Center Theater with Patti LuPone and Peter Gallagher in like 1998. And so going into Sweeney, and I think I'm not sure whether I hadn't worked with him yet on those, so I don't know to what extent he had this thought yet. But definitely in Sweeney, he was leaning into the kabuki tradition of these things called koken. I think it's Koken, which were the stagehands who could appear on stage all in black, and I think they wore special black gloves and could hand off props and things. And he felt that they could serve because Lonnie really wanted to he and Patti both felt very strongly that they didn't want actors holding scripts. They really wanted it to be a fully staged concert. I mean, essentially the only difference between these Lonnie concert stagings and a fully staged production is that there's a less intense budget for costumes and a much less intense budget for set design, and the orchestra is on stage, and the rehearsal process is cramped but full staging. Maybe choreography is somewhat diminished too, but certainly the physical staging and the actors are totally outbooked. It actually got me in trouble because a couple years later, when I was on my own, I directed a concert version of Snoopy with Sutton Foster and Christian Borle and Anne Harada.
Anne Harada, yeah.
Great people, Jen Cody, Hunter Foster, and Devin May. But I went in thinking I was going to do it Lonny Price style. And, Sutton was still doing 8 shows a week in Thoroughly Modern Millie, and they were all like, back it up, kid. Listen, you're lucky you got the gig and we're not putting our scripts down, So that was an interesting learning
Yeah, but
experience.
They did it with Lonnie, so why not?
Yeah, exactly. I was like, but
also, shout out to Snoopy. I played Snoopy in college. It's one of my favorite shows.
Such a good show.
Just so delightful.
It
Revival,
really is.
please.
Yeah, that needs to be remounted.
Yeah.
And the version I put together for that concert, Larry Grossman, the composer, was there, and he said it's the best synthesis of the different versions that had ever happened. So we should get that license. If anyone's listening from Music Theatre International or Samuel French or whoever licenses it. Anyway, so the koken were a kabuki thing, and for example, in Sweeney, the koken holds a stick that has the little bird that Joanna is singing to in Queen Finch and Linnet Bird. And the koken were especially instrumental in doing things with the murders in the pie shop, because, there's a lot of business that has to happen on stage in Sweeney. And Lonny wanted to do that in a artistically satisfying way, but without being able to have the full trappings of that you would have in a more elaborate physical production. And, in a way, it's just a sort of different take on the same philosophy behind like a John Doyle production. I think, or even something elaborate like a Julie Taymor Lion King, that bread and puppet tradition, it's elaborate, but it's not meant to trick the audience into seeing something that looks real. If you go see the Harry Potter production on stage, it's so real. My friend is in town with her little kids from San Francisco, and they went to see Harry Potter, and the kid was saying, "Oh, the CGI was so great." And I'm like, well, it's not CGI, but it feels like it, because they have found a way with technology, even on stage, to just seem real. What do you call the Dementors in Harry Potter? You actually feel like there's something floating above you, and
It's so
it's so theatrical, but it's theatrical in a way that's almost cinematic, because it feels it's realistic, as opposed to this kind of theater, the Julie Taymor thing, or the kabuki, which, or John Doyle, what Lonny was doing in Sweeney, which is that you see the strings attached. It's not that you're being tricked. I guess it's more Brechtian, because you're always aware that you're watching a theatrical presentation that's not real, but there's something so artful, and that really is essential to how you're experiencing the story, and it's especially fitting for musicals, because of course, no matter how good the acting is in a musical, people aren't singing in real life. So part of you is never allowed to forget that.
And I love the way that device heightens there's minimal props, and the only props are are Sweeney's razors,
Yeah.
and the case that they come in, and the stools.
By the way, those razors were the original razors from the original production that George Hearn had on the tour as well.
Oh, that's super cool.
Yeah.
Did he have them, or were they in storage somewhere?
I think he had them, actually.
Oh,
That production was not supposed to be George Hearn. It was originally a New York Philharmonic production with Bryn Terfel, and then they cast Patti LuPone, and then she requested Lonny be the director, and then Bryn Terfel had back surgery and had to pull out, and it was only a few weeks before the production started. I was originally like, oh, I'm assisting on Sweeney Todd with Patti LuPone and Bryn Terfel. Now, everyone I know that's an opera star, that's an opera fan, was like, how cool. I didn't know who the hell that was. I was more excited when he dropped out and it was George Hearn. But, for some people in the opera world, that was different.
Oh, but that's cool, because he was able to do it later in 2014 when
That's right, with Emma Thompson,
Lonny
yeah.
did Sweeney Todd again, which I also adore that production. Such a fun staging, the way you think it's a reading, and then they tear it all apart, which I just adore. And I also love in the 2000/2001 production, it kind of reminds me of the Hanamichi, the platform that's behind the orchestra. It's like, instead of being out across the audience, it comes across the orchestra.
Yes, I'm sure that I'm not as schooled, but I'm sure Lonny would tell you that was inspired by that also.
Yeah. And I also love the color palette of this production, the black and white, where it's mostly very black in color, and the very tiny touches of red and Joanna, and like the little touches of white on Anthony, and and Joanna's obviously all in white. Like, I love that color palette.
The costumes I thought were fabulous by Gail Broussard. I think that the concept was called deconstructed dinnerware. If you look, like what George is wearing as Sweeney is Prada. it's like very chic and modern, but in a way that feels somehow gothic also.
Yeah.
And and Patti in a sort of different spin on that, sort of like Laura Ashley in Hell or something, but I loved what they wore.
And you mentioned this kind of divide between opera and musical theater, and it's something the critics spoke about in the original, the New York Philharmonic
Yeah.
production. Like, is this opera? Is this musical theater? Question mark. Where did Lonnie see it, and where did you see it fitting in that between those two worlds?
That's interesting. I'm not sure what Lonnie's take on that would be. I mean, there certainly was a lot of press about that question, even as we were doing it. Um, and I think Sondheim always sort of brushed that question aside and would say, by the way, one of the great things about that experience was that Sondheim was extremely present during the process in all three cities. I even got to smoke a joint with him in at the Ravinia Festival. Um, and he would Sondheim would always brush that question off, saying that if it's performed in an opera house, it's opera, and that really, there's different styles of music that are more common in the different forms, but that there's the difference is only stylistic. And I remember being very disappointed when we opened at the New York Philharmonic that our New York Times review was by the music critic. I mean, it was a great review, but it was by the music critic and not by the theater critic. And for some reason, that was sad to me when I was 24. Well, I felt like
Rules creatures, what do they know?
he didn't have the context to talk about what I wanted to hear him talk about, But I mean, for me, the big advantage of that context, though, was the orchestra. I mean, I love Sweeney Todd so much, and I've seen so many incredible different productions, from John Doyle's to the Pie Shop production, and I will continue. I even like the movie, but the score will never feel as satisfying to me as when it's played by a symphonic orchestra. Because it has them. I mean, the reason I think Sweeney has appealed and been performed in opera houses almost from the beginning. Actually, I've seen the City Opera production at one point when Elaine Page came over to do it here. But it's been happening at City Opera since the early 80s, and operas all over. But I think, the score has muscularity anyway, and there's consistent underscoring. Anyway, the score is thrilling when it's played by
By
a
a full
full
symphony
orchestra.
orchestra. Yeah. And what struck me when I was rewatching it this time was just how much the strings add to it. It makes it that gothic, scary, really dramatic sound. It's so, so beautiful.
So beautiful. I mean, and
Yeah.
Joanna, when he sings Joanna, the way that orchestra just comes crashing to the end of that song, it just rips you. I mean, you sit there and you're like, how did anybody ever say Sondheim's music wasn't melodic? It's like, this is the most soaring romantic ballad ever.
And I love in Joanna's number before that, Greenfinch and Linnet Bird, where she's standing in front of the harp, and I'm obsessed with that staging because the symbol of it, like the idea of her as an angel, as this beautiful innocent creature standing in front of a harp, like it's
Totally.
just so gorgeous.
I mean, that Lonnie is so genius with that stuff. I mean, it always impressed me on Sweeney, later other shows I worked on. I remember when we were recording the cast recording of A Class Act, Lonnie could give a note to the sound engineer about the most subtle, minuscule things any piece of the band was doing at any point. And of course with the orchestra at Sweeney, Lonnie knew exactly where all the sort of gold was buried in the hills of those orchestrations. Talking about Broadway versus opera orchestrations, I'll never forget Patti LuPone, the very first Sitzprobe of Sweeney at the New York Philharmonic. Patti walks out onto the stage of Avery Fisher Hall, now David Geffen Hall. She's looking around and she shouts out to Lonnie in the house, "Is this where the band's gonna go?" About the fucking Philharmonic.
Where the orchestra were not present for this moment, I'm guessing.
They were filing in, but there were still open spaces that they hadn't taken up yet. Salt of the earth. Although I will say, you know what, Patti is she's a huge fan of classical music and classical dance too. And she is very schooled in, you know, when the second violin does what bow. I mean, she knows that world. I think she might have just been being funny, but you know, she is funny.
Just, the local band at
Yeah.
New York Philharmonic.
Yeah.
When was it decided that the San Francisco production would be filmed by PBS?
Well, how did it all come together? I think I believe a man named Michael Bartlett, who was the artistic coordinator of the San Francisco Symphony, had been aware of what happened at the New York Philharmonic. And I think, no, I think what happened was that we had done it at the Philharmonic when Wells Kaufman was the artistic administrator of the Philharmonic. And then Wells Kaufman, in the year after that, left the New York Philharmonic to become the president of the Ravinia Festival, which is the summer home of the Chicago Symphony. It's a beautiful place to go, by the way. It's outdoors and just a magical experience to see shows there, and, you know, to go to concerts there. And so Wells wanted to bring Sweeney there. I'm not sure if what happened first was Wells wanting to bring Sweeney to Ravinia after he had already presented it in New York and now he was at Ravinia, or first Michael wanted to bring it to San Francisco. But those two dates came together and they were a month apart in the summer of 2001. And then I think we had been in touch with Ellen Krass, who had produced the television broadcasts of Sweeney Todd and I don't know about Sweeney Todd, but Sending the Park to Georgia and Into the Woods and other things. And and her team, I think there had been interest in doing that in New York, but the budget hadn't come together in time. And then I think that when the new dates came up, they then got to work. But it still was a big undertaking financially. And I don't think that it was confirmed that we would be doing it until close to the actual dates.
Wow.
And I think that was 2001. We were doing a class act in between, first at Manhattan Theater Club and then on Broadway. And a class act opened on Broadway in March of 2001. And I remember even the Tony Awards, we were working on the presentation of the show for the Tony Awards in June of 2001, which was only a month before we would go to San Francisco. And it already, I think even then things were still somewhat up in the air about whether the funding would come together in time to film in San Francisco, but it did.
It's amazing to me. And Ellen Krass is someone who else is very important in the world of filmed theater.
You should have her on the pod.
Oh, that is my dream. She inspired the entire website. When I saw the 2011 production of Company filmed at the New York Philharmonic, there was a pre-taped interview in the cinema screening where she said she'd had trouble getting funding for filming Company in concert because no one had heard of filming a live musical for distribution. And I sat up in my seat and we've talked about growing up watching Into the Woods, and I was like, wait a minute, who hasn't heard of film? This is crazy. So I wrote my thesis on it and then built the whole website. And
does she know that?
I've reached out to her. I would love to speak with her again. I interviewed her for my thesis. No.
Oh, I'm gonna reach out to her for you. She's got to talk to you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I would. Dreams. She's just such an amazing, she's responsible for so many of these captures, and the groundwork that she's done. It's crazy to me still, even all these years later, people are so resistant to it. And we how important these captures are, not only for preserving our history, but for providing access to people, and not just in the United States, but around the world to this work. And it's it's so it makes me crazy to hear that this has been, I mean, it's decades of work that she has done. to make this happen.
Totally.
Oh. So we get to the funding comes together. It's a very quick rehearsal process. I mean, everyone had done it already in New York. Most people,
Not
Victoria,
everyone. I mean,
yeah,
it was Patty and George and Neil and Davis Gaines and John Ehlers as the Beetle and Stanford
Stanford
Olson
Olson,
as Pirelli. But we had a new judge. We had a new beggar
Beggar
woman.
Woman,
We had a new
Victoria Clark.
Joanna. And uh, so Victoria Clark, who had not really become a star. I mean, this is before, what do you call it? Light in the Piazza. And I think that Lisa, oh my God, I'm blanking. What's her
Vroman.
last name? Lisa Vroman. Thank you. I love her so much. I think she had maybe played Joanna in a production, but certainly not ours.
Had
And
she been Christine yet at that point?
yes, she had been Christine for
Mhm.
years in San Francisco and LA too, maybe. Or I mean, she had done a lot.
With
And
Davis Gaines as the Phantom.
yes, with Davis Gaines at the Phantom. And then what's his name that played the judge? Oh my God, I'm going senile now. Um, Timothy Nolan,
Hmm.
who had played both Sweeney and the judge many times over the years. So they knew the material, but they had not done our production. And not to mention the fact that the production had been over a year. And, I mean, and we were doing it in a new space. And, Patty had been doing other stuff, and so had George. I mean, everybody had, So it was we had the same amount of rehearsal we had the first time, but I remember Lonny and I went to Patty's house in Connecticut for a few nights and stayed over to just sort of crash course her in the material, which of course, was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. Uh, but I just remember rehearsing like in Patty's basement, just like her running through her stuff like over and over and over and over and over again.
And that's like it's not easy material. It's dense and it's wordy and
Yeah.
rhythmically complex.
Yeah.
And then on top of all that, you have a full symphony orchestra and the symphony chorus
Yeah.
with who are not just standing up the back in the risers, they're moving around and they have blocking
That
and
was
they're
my job.
acting.
I was assigned to direct the chorus.
And I love how much they're featured in the film too, that you there are lots of close-ups on their faces and
Yeah.
on their work. And it's I
Yeah.
as a chorus member myself, it's really great to see the chorus featured.
Yeah.
And so what was the process of filming? You mentioned earlier you were enjoying the show in the mez, but
Well, the thing is, I mean, in a way, it was kind of the best of both worlds because Lonnie worked so hard and really and knew the material so well, and he had a complete plan for the. He had in his mind what all the camera shots were for all 7 cameras. And he had in his mind a plan of when it was going to be which camera that would be used, but he still had all 6 getting coverage.
Mm.
And he knew what. So it's like, in a way, he almost storyboarded it 7 times differently. And that way he had so many options. And I remember him quoting to me his mentor as a television director, whose name escapes me, but he was a man that he had learned from directing the soap operas, who I think is a soap opera legend, Gary something maybe. But anyway, apologies to Gary, but it was something like about television directing. It's like you've got 7 cameras. Only an idiot's not going to be able to get the story, which Lonnie would joke about. But I mean, but of course, especially with a live performance, you very easily could lose it. But Lonnie was just so thorough and so prepared, and he just knew that material. Like I said, every single subtle thing happening in the orchestra, every lyric, inside and out. And, Lonnie is really an actor's director. He really understood the ins and outs of what makes George Hearn's Sweeney Todd great. what makes Patti LuPone's Mrs. Lovett great. And so was able to, feature them. I mean, I thought he did such a beautiful job with, as a Patti LuPone fan who lives for the moments when Patti gives a side eye about Mrs. Mooney has a pie shop, or lives for the way she like unhooks her
Her
jaw
gestures,
and
yeah.
lets out the belt voice just like explode out. Lonny knew how to capture that most excitingly. Pirelli at the end of the Miracle Elixir hitting like almost like a tenor in the old cartoons where you see like the epiglottis, as he hits the note. Lonny really knew when to zoom in and what, he just had such excellent taste for how to maximize everything that is great and enjoyable and important in the storytelling. And I really think it's such an ideal version of the show.
Totally agree. And you mentioned earlier the editing process. How long was that, and what was involved in that?
Well, it was tricky because, in a weird way, sort of resonant of the time that we're in now. We were at the Ravinia Festival. It was like the end of August of 2001. And we got back to New York City, and September 11th happened.
Mm.
And the editing bay we were supposed to use was downtown, and the whole downtown was closed for a certain period of time. I mean, if you lived there, you could barely get there, let alone to work. And it was a really scary time, so it kind of slowed it down a little. But in my mind, it went on for months and months, but I know that's not true because it was released. It premiered on Halloween.
Halloween, yeah.
But wait, was it Halloween the following year, maybe? I don't
I would need
remember
to double
exactly when.
check. Yeah, but it was Halloween. You're right.
No, it had to be Halloween the following year that it was released, because I also remember ahead of the release, Lonny rented a small cinema to have a private release party that was very exciting. Sondheim was there, and these people. So it must have been. So, and I think that was in the summer. So I think because by the way, the other thing was the audio. I remember it was a big deal. This was one of the first things that was being done in 5.1 Dolby Sound, but that was sort of required a whole other. That's where I was sort of like bored. I mean, Lonny could sit there and be like, "Oh, this string part sounds better when we bring in the left channel on top of the right, but I was like, oh.
Wow.
It was very exciting to watch him in the editing bay, see the main camera as in whichever one he had previously designated to be for that moment. And then all the other 6 cameras there, the alternate options that were available. And then the different things he had cut together, at different points. And it was just very cool. And even in, even we were in San Francisco for maybe 3 nights. And I remember even being in Lonny's hotel room, and he already was looking at, the dailies from and it was like, in my mind at that point, to watch it on a laptop screen, I was sort of like, yeah. But Lonny was already just doing it.
Wow. And how brilliant to have, he has like a very artistic brain that can like put the production together, but then this technical brain that's able to film it, and like two very separate parts of the thought process and the creative
Totally.
process, to be able to put both of them together. It's so
I mean, I think, with Sweeney, he would tell you that he had the advantage of doing it first for the stage. And then, so that was, we already had the book from the New York Sweeney of all the staging to work from in San Francisco. So then, Lonny could sort of relax. He certainly gave me a lot more directing responsibility in San Francisco with Sweeney Todd. And then he even did in the future, because it was already done by him in a way that he liked, and I could just sort of recreate it, and he could be focused on the cameras. Whereas, shows televised things he did later on that I was no longer working for him, like the Candide or the Company, he was doing them all at the same time, the staging it and the directing the cameras.
I can't even like fathom the amount of work that takes to be prepared for both of those
Yeah.
things. Because the filming was kind of decided late in the process, was anything changed, or even while you were doing the performances, was anything changed on stage, like blocking or lighting or anything like that to accommodate for the cameras?
Very little staging wise. I mean, part of the beauty and of having the 7 cameras, and one of the things that Lonnie probably one of the main reasons Lonnie would veer from whatever his original plan was. I mean, obviously the point was to be open creatively to see if he had better ideas of which camera to use. But one of the reasons technically that he might have often had to change his original plan in terms of which camera to be on at a certain moment was because there were cameras on stage to get
Mm.
certain kinds of close-ups and traveling shots. Those cameras would then sometimes be in a shot, so those would then not be the shots that would be used.
Yeah.
So that was another thing. And lighting, absolutely, we had to use a different lighting designer who was experienced in television, and the lighting, I would say, looked worse in San Francisco than it did in New York on stage, because it looked fabulous on camera and had to be
Hmm.
specifically conceived for the camera. You had to
Do you
have
think
compromised stage lighting in order to have the ideal product. I mean, it wasn't bad, but that had to be the god that it served, rather than purely being about just being beautiful and effective on stage. And I think that is probably a common situation. It's just going back to what you were saying, even with bootlegs, where especially in the old days, you would just be looking at a spotlight. It's stage lighting does not read on camera, and even a good camera is still going to work. You're going to look better with lighting that's designed for the screen.
do you think that having cameras on stage or having to adjust the lighting, does that impact the audience's experience of the people who are in the theater?
Well, I don't think they certainly noticed the difference in lighting. I mean, I barely noticed it, and I had just seen the better version in New York, but I'm sure Lonnie had moments where he was like, oh, God, I wish this could be this lighting. But like, I think that gets into a subtle level that maybe if there's a lighting designer in the house, they would be like, ugh, why did they choose this? And then you'd be like, because we're filming it. They'd be like, oh, okay. But, so I think that only affects the audience in a very subtle way, but it certainly is to the detriment, however subtle. The cameras, for the most part, no. I mean, I think it's kind of in a way, it's almost an extension of the thing with the kabuki stuff, where it's like you're already watching a presentation, and I think it's almost like it makes it more exciting. It's like if there's a sense of an event, we're seeing the one.
Yeah.
Don't tell them that it's being filmed tomorrow and the night after too.
But you are very special. You are here for the performance.
Yeah.
Before we move on from Sweeney, do you have a favorite moment from being a part of that production?
Yeah. God, I mean, so many. Uh,
Apart
definitely
from smoking a
smoking
joint
the
with
joint with
Stephen
Sondheim
Sondheim,
was
of
pretty
course.
great. Just there were so many moments that were so great, just in terms of my experience of Patti. But keeping it more tied to the actual material. I think maybe my favorite moment, which sadly is not preserved, was in New York at the Sitzprobe. It was the first time that Sondheim was part of that process. Then he was around for the rest of that, and then he was around a lot for San Francisco and Ravinia. Well, Ravinia, he just came to the show and hung out, but San Francisco, he was really in the room. But New York, he hadn't been around until the Sitzprobe, and we were doing the finale, and it's the you know. Of all the demons of hell come to torment me, my Lucy, And Patti said to Steve, what am I supposed to sing here? It's like, oh no, not light at all. And she's like, I'm looking at the score and it's just X's where there should be a note. And he's like, yeah, just jump in wherever. And she's like, what do you mean? What did Angela do? And he's like, she just jumped in, whatever. It doesn't matter, Patti. It's not. It's really. It's supposed to be just jumping in wherever. which is by the way, every other moment with him is him being like, no, it's got to be like,
This is a 16th note, not a dotted.
yeah, but this
Yeah.
was written to be freestyle, and Patti was like extremely uncomfortable with that because she was working so hard. It was her first Sondheim show. So then I think maybe we did it once and she sort of was really holding back and it wasn't really landing. And Lonny was like, I can't even hear you or something like that. And, so then we did it again. And what Patti did was the most thrilling thing I've ever heard in my life. It was like, she was like, oh no, not lied at all. No, I never lied. Such a took the poison she did. Never said that she died. Poor thing, she lived, but it left her sick. I'm getting the lyrics mixed up. That should have been in hospital, wound up in Bedlam instead. Poor thing, better you should think she was dead. Yes, I lied, cause I love you. I'd be twice the wife she would. And she was just belting it out. And it was the most dramatic climax of the whole show. And she's like, I love you, could that thing have cared for you like me? And it was like, I just remember like holding my breath in just like complete dazzlement. And like, and Patti looked so like she needed, like she'd really put herself out there because she was just like singing out this huge vocal line, and I was just like, just falling out of my chair. And then like, so the thing was over and she's like, was like that, Steve? And he was like, yeah, whatever, just jump in. And I was like, no, tell her yes, God damn it, tell her yes. And I'm like looking at Lonny and Lonny just like not even like giving a and like, and then she never did it like that again. She she kind of did it. She did the acting like that and she sang on those rhythms. But like, it was like, could that thing have cared for you like me? And I was like, and it's just the whole line. She had done it all in one breath, more than I could do in describing it to you. She sang from the, oh no, not lied at all. That whole line straight through, just bigger. And it was so amazing. And someday I'll direct Sweeney Todd and, I'll make sure that it's sung that way. I probably doubt anybody else can have the lung power.
Yeah. Oh, what a special moment to have in your heart and in your memory that,
Yeah.
like you say, hasn't been preserved for
No.
posterity. Oh, Ben, this has just been so much fun. I have a series of questions
Oh, wonderful.
that I ask all my guests.
Great.
You don't need to think about it too much. Whatever comes to mind is fabulous. There
Wonderful.
are no wrong answers. What is your favorite musical?
I would say Evita. It's easy for me to go in circles off of that, but that's the best answer for me. Otherwise we could be here all day and I'll never choose, but it's Evita.
I'm with you. It depends what mood I'm in, what day it is.
Sure.
Do you have a favorite filmed live musical?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I would say that, I feel stupid saying it, but I would say that's Sweeney Todd with Patti and George,
It holds such a special place for you, of course.
But it's like I really think I enjoy it as a fan, because I'm just such a fan of the piece, and I feel like that is the best representation of it, and it's just one of my favorite Patti performances. I feel like she really is in the perfect sweet spot of doing her really acting and really serving the material, but really just being such a diva at the same time,
It feels, I think of the word unhinged. Like
Yeah.
her Mrs. Lovett is so unhinged, but she has so much control over it. It's not crazy, it's unhinged.
and no one's ever sung it like that, and I've seen great women play the part, but she really gave a thrilling Patti LuPone vocal in that performance.
Totally.
I wish that audio album was available streaming for people, because it was like a special New York Philharmonic Records release, and it never, the children don't know. It was never on iTunes. It's certainly not on Apple Music or Spotify or anything, and they're missing out because it was something.
This is the downside of digital. Not everything is available.
Well, listen, that went out of print on CD, so don't blame digital.
I do. I still blame digital. A filmed live musical is not quite a stage show and it's not quite a movie. So what should we call it?
Oh, um, how about you've heard of MOTW, which is a movie of the week?
Yeah.
How about MOTV, which is a musical on TV?
Oh, I like that. That's cute. MOTV. Where do you stand on bootlegs?
I love them. Let them roll. I wish more people would bootleg more shit. Listen,
uh,
it should not be done in a way that's annoying or even distracting in any way to anybody in the theater. We've all paid our tickets to see the performance. We don't need to like move our leg for this guy's tripod, or we shouldn't have a bright light in our face or anything. So that is, I think the people making the bootleg should be held to the same standard of audience behavior that everyone is. But within those boundaries, if they can create that content, I don't think that hurts anyone. I think that it is good for the success of the show. I think it is good for the success of the actor. And I think that the idea that it's not is false.
what stage musicals do you wish had been filmed?
Oh, God. Well, Evita with Patti LuPone and Gypsy with Ethel Merman, and the original productions of Follies and Company and A Little Night Music, and I mean, Liza and Cheetah in the Rink, although maybe that's a stretch since it was a flop. But, just so many. I think everything should be.
Yeah, me too. What would you like to see filmed in the future?
Well, there's a brilliant new musical that has just started previews on Broadway called A Strange Loop that won the Pulitzer Prize last year following its run at Playwrights Horizons. And it is, I'm sure I shouldn't jinx it by being so confident, but it is such a good show, and people are appreciating it so intensely that I feel like it will be filmed. But that is one I would for sure like to see filmed, and I'd like everybody to be able to see the brilliant original cast and Stephen Brackett's brilliant production, because I'm sure this show is so impactful. I'm sure that ultimately it will be produced everywhere. But I hope that people will all get to experience this really terrific version.
I have my tickets for a couple of weeks, so I cannot
Wonderful.
wait. I'm
Wonderful.
nervous now because like shows have started canceling again, so I'm like, oh, let me be able
Yeah.
to see
Yeah, you
it.
need backup dates always.
Yes. And finally, where can we find you online?
I am at Ben Rimalower on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and YouTube, and I'm on TikTok, but at my age it's unseemly to create content there. I think I just watch. And they can come if they're in New York City every Monday night at 8 p.m. at Club Cumming. Daniel Nolan and I host Cast Offs, which is a Broadway music variety and game show. Yeah, and it's free Mondays at 8 at Club Cumming. And soon we'll be launching the Cast Offs podcast, but that's a couple months away.
Yay. Well, Ben, thank you so much. This has just been such a treat.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
The Filmed Live Musicals podcast is created and edited by your host, Luisa Lyons, with thanks to our wonderful patrons, Josh Brandon, Geraldine Brewer, Belinda Broido, Elliot Charles, Jillian Dos Santos, Rachel Esteban, Mercedes Esteban Lyons, Rusty Fox, David Jones, James T. Lane, Allison Matthews, Al Monaco, David Negrin, Amy Penn, Gerald Piper, Jesse Rabinowitz and Brenda Goodman, David and Catherine Rabinowitz, Joe Tillotson, and Beck Twist for financially supporting the site. FilmedLiveMusicals.com is the most comprehensive list of film stage musicals. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. If you would like early access to this very podcast, early access to site content, the full weekly newsletter with info on upcoming streams, and exclusive access to the streaming calendar, become a Filmed Live Musicals patron for as little as $3 a month. And if you're outside the US, you can sign up in your local currency. Visit FilmedLiveMusicals.com to learn more. If you like what you hear, please leave a review through the Rate This Podcast link in the show notes. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and thanks for listening.